Our next question comes from a listener in Lenoir City, Tennessee. She writes, would you please address the problem of being unequally yoked in the sense of an unbeliever?
Now, may I say to you that the passage that you are using comes from 2 Corinthians. You did not give me the scripture, but I'm sure this is the passage that you have reference to. It's in 2 Corinthians, the 6th chapter, and it's at verse 14. I think I should turn there and read that. I'm turning to 2 Corinthians now, the 6th chapter, and I begin reading at verse 14. He says, be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness, and what communion hath light with darkness, and what concord hath Christ with Belial, or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? The whole point of Paul's statement is that in that day the Corinthian believers were being yoked together with idolatry. In other words, many of them said they could become Christians and still go up to the temple of Belial, up to the worship actually of Apollo and Venus, and it was gross immorality, and it was, of course, idolatry. Paul is saying that you cannot be yoked with that and at the same time be a Christian. Now, that is the thing that he is saying, and that is the direct interpretation of it. Now, that's been stretched out to mean that you cannot be a member of a Bible church and be a member of a liberal church, or that you can be a member of a liberal church and not be a member of a Bible church. That means you're unequally yoked together. May I say to you, I don't think that is the direct application of it at all. However, I have a feeling that you can certainly make an application in that direction. I do not think that a Christian ought to go in partnership in business with a non-Christian. I could give you a dozen illustrations I know in my ministry of men in the church that went in partnership with an unbeliever, and the unbeliever can use methods that the believer cannot use. A man told me that when he sold his business, he'd worked for 30 years to make that name of the business a reputable name. And he said that the man he sold it to was an unbeliever, and he was cutting corners, dishonest in his dealings. To that man, he's an unbeliever. He thinks it's all right. In fact, he'd talked to him about it, and he felt like that he was doing business the way that he should do it. He said that it's just ruined the name of that business that he'd been so long building it up. Therefore, a believer ought not to be yoked together in business. Now, he was not in partnership with him at all, but he couldn't be. That was the first step that the man wanted, was him to be his partner. Well, he turned that down. He saw that very clearly. And there have been so many men that have found themselves in a business with a partner that's dishonest, and they cannot be that as a child of God. And I think that it has reference to that. Now, I don't want to be extreme in my interpretation, but I do believe that it does have reference today, and I cannot understand how a person can be a member of a church and sit Sunday after Sunday and listen to a man absolutely deny the deity of Christ, actually ridicule the inspiration of Scripture, and continue on as a member in that church. I do not understand it. Now, I know that a great many people do that. I would say that this has reference to that, and I think that is the sense of it. This party here says, I have attempted, inasmuch as I am able, to live a life which might reflect my Christianity, but alas, I'm bound to stumble from time to time. Well, I think your stumbling has nothing in the world to do with being unequally yoked together. Now, I feel that it's true in marriage today, especially. I do not think a believer ought to marry an unbeliever. In fact, I made it a practice in my ministry not to do that. Of course, I do know that it's turned out in several cases where especially the man, in order to get the girl, claimed to be a Christian, but he was not a Christian at all. It worked out that he was anything but a Christian, and the girl finally had to leave the unbeliever. But that was, of course, misrepresentation, and it's hard to deal with that. And so my feeling is that if you have married an unbeliever, you've done a very unwise thing. But if you, as a believer, and that was the thing that existed among the Corinthians, was that both of them were unbelievers, and one heard the gospel, and the question was, should the believer leave the unbeliever? Or, if the unbeliever wants to leave, should the other one attempt to hold on to him or her? Well, Paul said that if the unbeliever wants to go, let him go, because of the way the thing worked out. But if you have married an unbeliever and knew it when you married him, then my point is that you ought to try to work that out, because as a Christian, I don't think you'd have the right to just walk out just because of the fact that you've made that mistake. Now, apparently, this party that's written this has reference to marriage, and I would say that it's very unfortunate to be married to an unbeliever. I'm sure that you're not having as happy a marriage as you'd like to have, but you find yourself that you are married to him, and I would say that you ought to make an attempt to try to work it out. I would not compromise one whit in my Christianity if I were you, not bend to doing something that was absolutely unchristian, contrary to the morality of a Christian. I would not stoop to do a thing like that. And if he seeks to leave you, then you just have to let him leave you. But you must hold to Christian principles and, of course, try to win him. But the way that they try to win him today is not my idea of witnessing for Christ, by the way. And I would say that you should make the gospel very clear to him and what you believe and your principles, and have some understanding in that particular area.